Got an upcoming interview and want to prepare as quickly as possible without boring yourself to death or stressing out too much? Well, stay tuned. We're going to talk all about that. Hi there, I'm Kevin with Got the Dream, and we're here to help you learn the secrets of interviewing for the most competitive positions out there. And on this channel, we discuss everything you need to up your game to land that first job or take your current job to the next level, whether it be interviewing, resumes, cover letters, or job hunting in general. So if you're here for the first time, consider subscribing by clicking the button down below, and that way you'll always know when we put out a new video. Also, if there's anything you want clarification about, I'll always make sure to put show notes down below as well as links in the description. Now, preparing for an upcoming interview, how do you do it? Now, there are 3 main steps that I advise all my candidates that I work with to go through while preparing for a job interview. Of course, I'm somebody who likes things in 3. As I've said in other videos, it just makes things a little easier to remember, and my goal is never to overwhelm you with too much information. That said, I'm sure there are about 100 things in reality that you'll really need to think about before your upcoming interview. There's a lot of little things and a few big things. Let's just focus on the big things though. If you want to know all the little things that you need to think about before your upcoming interview, down in the description you'll find a link to download our free day of the interview checklist, which is a great cheat sheet for making sure that you have all of your ducks in a row on the day of your upcoming interview. Okay, so let's get to the 3 steps I mentioned. The first one, brushing up on your knowledge of interview best practices. Number 2, conducting thorough research about the company or position that you're interviewing for. And thirdly, practice, practice, practice. It's important that they're in that order. Now, I'll be talking a lot about the second step, research, in this video because I think it's one of the things that is most overlooked by candidates. But that said, all 3 steps are so important that we're going to go through and touch on each of them. So again, let's go back to number 1, which is to brush up on your knowledge of interview fundamentals and interview best practices. As I'd like to say on this channel, most candidates never go beneath the surface of how interviews really work. They never really understand why certain questions are asked and how interviews can use tricky questions to try to make educated guesses about how good of a candidate you really are. Most candidates bungle up their interview, often falling into the very traps that the hiring managers have set for them. Traps that make it easier for those potential employers to weed out candidates that seem incompetent. However, when you truly understand how interviews work under the surface, you stand a much better chance of not only responding to common interview questions effectively, but also to tricky and uncommon interview questions as well. These days, there's a lot of ways to learn about interview fundamentals. Obviously, I'm going to recommend jumping on YouTube. Some of you may have found this video that way, but also consider Facebook Watch, which is sort of their version of YouTube, and now even LinkedIn videos, which are starting to become a lot more helpful, especially since they're so business focused. And for those who want an easy to follow system, check out our course Interview Victory, which walks you through all of those interview fundamentals with a simple step-by-step process. There's a link in the description below. Yet I want to be clear, I'm not just telling you to look up answers to various interview questions. I'm suggesting that you learn as much as you can about the different types of interviews, the different types of interview questions, the different ways selection processes are conducted, so that you have a better idea of what's going on behind the scenes when you show up to an interview. As I probably mentioned in other videos, I've spent over 10 years interviewing candidates in academic and corporate settings. But the thing is that it wasn't until I started interviewing candidates and gained an understanding of how interview processes really work that I started to become a skilled candidate myself. Before that, I would simply show up as a novice interviewer and wonder why nothing ever worked out. One of the major changes that took place that helped me become a skilled interviewee was when I understood the full picture of the interview process, how it works, and what's going on behind those scenes. Having this kind of knowledge is going to give you the ability to be agile in any interview situation that you encounter. When you get questions you've never heard before, you'll understand what types of questions those are, which will help you understand where they're coming from and what they're really trying to get at. Step number 2 is research. And the question you need to ask yourself is, how do I make sure that I know more about this company or position than any other candidate that shows up for that interview? Now, some good news. This is something that most candidates just don't do a very good job of. The bad news, of course, well, it's easy to be like most other candidates and just not do a very good job with your interview preparation. Now, what do most candidates do for research? Well, they immediately type in the website of the company they're going to be interviewing at, and they read about, the about page, or maybe they read about the vision or mission of the company. Maybe they'll even go so far as to read a Wikipedia entry and learn about the history of that company maybe a century ago. The problem is, if you have an upcoming interview with IBM, for instance, knowing the fact that Charles Watson, which was one of the first CEOs for IBM, made the company into one of the most successful computer companies back in the 1920s, isn't enough to showcase that you have current knowledge about IBM, is it? Do you understand IBM in the 21st century, not the 20th century? When I talk about research, what I mean is that you have to understand the current challenges and current strengths of that company or organization, as well as the political, economic, and environmental factors that the company is currently facing or is likely to face in the future. Now, this could also apply to departments. If you are an internal candidate and you already know the company culture and you already know the company mission and all that stuff, great. Maybe you'll be interviewing at a different department and you'll need to understand some of the current challenges that department's facing, or even a team, let's say, understanding what challenges they're facing or what likely they're going to be challenging in the future. So some of you might be thinking, hey, why do I need to know all this bird's eye view about the company that I'm going to be interviewing for? I'm just going to be interviewing as maybe an admin assistant or an accountant or just a straightforward engineer. I don't need to know all the different issues that a CEO or COO knows, do I? Now that's a good question, and in truth, you're possibly right. As for me though, I'm very risk averse. I don't like to take chances when it comes to interviewing, especially if I really want that position. Think about it in terms of a ship. Every ship has a destination, and most ships of a certain size have a captain or some number of senior officers besides just the crew, right? Let's say you're interviewing for the role of a crewmate, not a captain, not an officer. Your job may be to make sure that the engine is running smoothly and doesn't break, doesn't overheat. And if you get the position, you'd be stationed down below the deck, maybe where you're not even able to see the sky every day. To you, it doesn't matter what direction the ship is headed or where it's even going. All your job is focused on is making sure that that engine is in good shape and doesn't break, right? That said, do you really think it's not important to know where the ship is headed or why the ship is headed to its destination? Sure, you could say, well, the captain knows where we're going. I just need to focus on this engine. Okay. Yet wouldn't it be nice to know whether this was a cargo ship or a battleship? Not only would it be nice to know, but knowing that destination and why you're going there might actually impact the effectiveness of your job performance as that engine operator. If you knew that during the next voyage you'd be sailing into enemy waters, for instance, you might be compelled to perform an extra thorough engine inspection so as to ensure that the engine doesn't have any mechanical problems, causing it to maybe break down at a crucial time where everyone's life was on the line. In the same way, in any organization or company, the more each and every employee is behind the same mission and working towards the same overall goals, the more successful that company is going to be. Now, the most important lesson with everything I'm saying about research is this. Doing the research and being able to discuss the things you've learned in that research during your interview demonstrates to your potential hiring managers that you are an A-plus candidate. It demonstrates an immense amount of preparedness, strong intellect, and ability to communicate effectively, all in one swoop. And it's just darn impressive. So make sure to take research very seriously. And finally, step 3 is, of course, practice, practice, practice. Now, how's that cliche go? Practice makes perfect. Or the one I like better is practice makes the master. I can tell you that in my old days when I was just an interview candidate, I hadn't interviewed anyone before, the way I would prepare for interviews was to look up possible interview questions, read about what good answers maybe were, and perhaps I'd pick up a book on the subject. This was in the old days, 2000 era, before YouTube existed and, bookstores were still a place you could go. Then I would just simply show up for my interview and hope for the best. Well, if you can guess, that didn't go very well. After a number of occasions of going to interviews and thinking I did pretty well, I'd often receive an email a few weeks later thanking me for my time, but letting me know that unfortunately I was not what they were looking for. And I started to wonder if there was something I was missing. That missing piece didn't come until years later when I started to interview candidates, got on the other side of that table and began to be an interviewer. And then even years later after that, when I started to help candidates, that's when I realized the power of practice. Practice has a huge impact on a candidate's performance, and the truth is there's simply no substitute. Now down the road, I plan to do an entire video all about how to best practice for your upcoming interview. But let me just say a few important things about how to go about practicing. Now technically, yes, you can practice on your own, but it's better to practice your interviewing skills with another person. This helps to create a more realistic interview practice scenario, and it's always better to get feedback about yourself from someone other than yourself, right? You can choose just about anybody to help you practice. It could be a sibling, or it could be a spouse or partner. It could be a coworker or a friend, and of course it could be an interview professional coach, like the ones that we have and set people up here at Interview Victory. Any way you go, let me just say that any amount of practice is better than no practice at all. You're going to want to have your friend or partner or whomever will be interviewing you ask you questions that you expect on your upcoming interview based on your research. And you're going to want to do your best not to break character, but to really stay in the interview moment until the questions are over. Now, my main message to you, though, is to start thinking about this as early as you can once you've been invited to an upcoming interview. Even if you just plan to practice with a family member, you want to make sure that there's enough time to do a few practice sessions, and that all of your practice sessions come after you've brushed up your knowledge about interviewing, step 1, and you've done a thorough amount of research similar to what we discussed in number 2. Whatever you do, please don't wait until the night before to start practicing for your upcoming interview. It should be done weeks before, not days before, if at all possible. So those are my 3 steps to preparing for your upcoming job interview. My hope for you is that you do your best to complete each of these steps as thoroughly and as diligently as you can, because that is what will make the biggest difference in your ability to perform during that interview. Okay though, so I have a question for all of you, which is, what is the most difficult question that you've ever encountered in a job interview? Please write it down in the comments below so that not only I can take a look, but that everyone else can. And I think this will be super helpful for when people are preparing their practice questions, right? Guys, if you like this video and you found it helpful, which I really hope you did, please hit the like button below. It really helps us out. And if you have any questions about interviewing that you'd like answered, in the description there's a link called Ask Kevin a Question. You can click on that and you'll be whisked away to a place where you can write your question in so that I can make a video to help you out. Or if you just want to leave a comment below, I'll do my best to answer it. Also, if you haven't already, make sure to grab that free day of the interview checklist that I mentioned before that I have linked near the top of the description below. See you later everyone, and happy interviewing.